Okay,
Welcome,
great.
everyone. We start getting people in. So as soon as we hit over 50, maybe we can start right away. And if you can put in the chat, where are you signing in from? That will be great. We are really excited to have the first community conversation together. We are so close. Okay, we hit the 50. So we can start actually right away. The call will be definitely recorded. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as we want to really to get to know you. And we are so excited to have you all. My name is Basma Alawi, and I am the Director of External Affairs at the Community Sponsorship Hub. Thank you for joining us today. We will have actually an amazing overview of community sponsorship initiatives in the United States, including a look back at welcoming communities and the latest developments in private sponsorship of refugees. You will all hear from speakers on the Welcome Corps and the Welcome Corps on campus. This webinar is part of Community Conversations, a monthly webinar hosted by the Community Sponsorship Hub and our partners, really to discuss sponsorship initiatives and its impact on our communities. I want to ask you to join us monthly to stay informed and hear from speakers on a variety of topics related to community sponsorship in the United States. Some fun fact about today's call: we had over 200 registration for the first event. We have got requested to translate materials after the call to French, Creole, Arabic, Farsi, Karen, and Spanish. We have registrants from 41 states, including really big crowd from New York and Texas. And I want to start also really to introduce our speaker, and then right away starting with our amazing conversation with a really a lot of topic to discuss. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I want to make sure that you know that you will receive the link for today's recording and the slide via email after the session. And we ask you to use the Q&A really to put all of your questions, and we will make sure to answer them today or after the call, depending on the time. I want to introduce my speakers for the first community conversation. We have Elizabeth Beth from Welcome Corps. She is the Welcome Corps Director at Community Sponsorship Hub. Elizabeth Boydell, Private Sponsorship Program Director at the International Refugee Assistance Project. And we have also Aubrey Grant, the Program Manager, Practice and Research at the Community Sponsorship Hub. So really to start right away, we want to really understand fully the sponsorship, the Welcome Corps, and how the Welcome Corps really interact with or part of the U.S. Refugee Admission Program. So my question to you, Lizzie, is how does the new Welcome Corps program align and contribute to the established framework of the U.S. Refugee Admission Program?
Thanks, Basma. Happy to be here with everyone today. I think if we can go ahead to our slides. Great. I'm going to talk a little bit about the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program today because the Welcome Corps program is a part of that. I'm going to give a quick overview of what the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program is, how people access it, what happens to the cases that go through the program, how the Welcome Corps and the Reception and Placement Program both sit underneath this umbrella, and then talk a little about the presidential determination. So as I mentioned, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program is kind of twofold at this point. The new Welcome Corps program is a part of the existing U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. We've had a refugee admissions program formally since the 1980s, and we've had hundreds of thousands, probably millions of cases at this point, I don't have an exact figure, of cases have been resettled to the United States through traditional resettlement, refugees arriving in the country and being welcomed by a resettlement agency's local affiliate office. So that program is longstanding, has done incredible work resettling so many refugees. And as of this year, we have an additional kind of pillar of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program called the Welcome Corps program, and that sits alongside the traditional reception and placement program. So the Welcome Corps program is for private sponsorship of refugees. It's recently launched. And then the reception and placement program is what happens through resettlement agencies, and that's our traditional longstanding sub-program. So what is the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program? Apologies for those of you who have more background in this area, but just to level set for everyone. The U.S. Refugee Admissions Program is the U.S. program for resettling people who meet the U.S. refugee definition to the United States from abroad. This is different from asylum. And our asylum system is for displaced people who are already in the United States or at the US border. It's different from humanitarian parole because it offers a durable rather than a temporary status. And as I mentioned, both private sponsorship and traditional resettlement are components of it. So every year, the US President, in consultation with Congress, sets a target number called the Presidential Determination for refugees to be resettled in the U.S. in the coming fiscal year. And refugees are referred to the U.S. through one of a few different access streams. You can see on here, priority 1 is for individual referrals who come mostly from UNHCR, sometimes also from embassies or nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations, NGOs. Priority 2 is a group-based access stream, and that's for people of nationalities that the Department of State has designated as being of special concern. Priority 3 is for family reunification for refugees. And then priority 4, which is launching soon, is for privately sponsored refugees resettled through the Welcome Corps program who are identified or named by their private sponsors on an application. So once referred through one of those priority streams to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, a case is going to go to a resettlement support center. There are several around the world, geographically based, which collect information to prepare a case for screening by the U.S. government. USCIS, or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, another government agency, is going to look at the information that the RSC has collected. That's biographic information, biodata, documentation, and USCIS is going to do an interview with that refugee and conduct a lot of different security screening. If USCIS approves a case, then the case is going to pass on to medical screenings, an assurance process, and cultural orientation. And ultimately, if everything goes well, is scheduled for travel. And when someone arrives, they're received either by a local RA affiliate office or now by a private sponsor group in the United States. The processing is the same, whether a case comes through Welcome Corps or through traditional resettlement and placement resettlement. The difference is in where the referral is coming from in some cases, and then in who's welcoming the refugee once they arrive in the United States. So any case that's coming in, whether it's coming in through the resettlement and placement program or the Welcome Corps program, needs to meet the U.S. refugee definition. This is a refugee definition that's incorporated into U.S. law by Congress, and it's defined as any person who's outside of any country of the person's nationality, or in the case of a person having no nationality, is outside any country in which such person last habitually resided and who is unable or unwilling to return to, and unable or unwilling to avail himself or herself of the protection of that country because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. So that's a lot and it's complicated. So breaking it down a bit to kind of the top line points, someone needs to be outside of their country of origin. They've fled outside of their country of origin. And they've fled due to persecution or fear of persecution. They're still outside of the United States for the purposes of refugee resettlement. They haven't been firmly resettled in their host country. meaning that they haven't gotten a durable status in the country that they fled to initially. The persecution that they've experienced or that they fear is based on one of those 5 factors: race, religion, nationality, particular social group, or political opinion. When referring cases for US RAP, UNHCR, the UN Refugee Commission, also looks at whether a case meets special vulnerability factors. And all refugees who come through Welcome Corps or through the Priority 4 category will need to meet this US refugee definition, as well as some other eligibility criteria. And I want to emphasize that there are other eligibility criteria coming, but they're not yet available. So we don't yet know what those additional eligibility criteria will be. Anything that you might be hearing, rumors, et cetera, are just that. We're still waiting on the official eligibility criteria, and when that becomes available, it'll be on the Welcome Corps website for everyone to view. So how many refugees enter the US every year is a function of the presidential determination. On an annual basis, the president consults with Congress and sets a target number for refugees to be resettled in the coming fiscal year. So this often happens in September, October, and President Biden will soon be doing this fall. There's an annual number, and that number will include both refugees resettled through reception and placement or resettlement agencies, as well as refugees being resettled through private sponsors. And we expect that the overall number will take into account the added capacity for resettlement that we're creating through private sponsorship through the Welcome Corps. So we're expecting the number should be robust, and it'll take into account that we can resettle more refugees in addition to what we would have resettled anyway through resettlement agencies, because we have the new Welcome Corps program. The number in the presidential determination does not include humanitarian parole cases, because those are not refugee cases and they fall outside of the presidential determination. And co-sponsorships which are a partnership between a sponsor group and a resettlement agency. That falls in the traditional resettlement and placement program category. And those cases are only limited in number by the number of cases that go to RAs, and how many of those cases RAs can or want to partner with co-sponsors on. So that number is included within the overall presidential determination to the extent that it falls under the number for traditional resettlement. It's not a separate stream of cases. So with that, I think I've given you a quick overview of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. I'll be able to answer questions a little bit later in the program, and I'll turn it back over to Basma to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. That was really, really helpful as we really understood better more about the U.S. Refugee Admission Program, the different of P1, P2, P3, and P4, and some really good definitions of refugees and other people with forced displacement. And now I know I have heard it before. Many people really have questions about the different sponsorship exists within the United States. So I want to ask Aubrey, if you could provide us with an overview of sponsorship within the historical context, highlighting the progression of community engagement and the emergence of the Welcome Corps program as well.
Thank you so much, Basma. One of the wonderful strengths of the United States resettlement program is the role that communities such as those of you on this call can play in welcoming refugees as they rebuild their lives in the United States. So over the past as long as we've had immigration policies, there have been roles in which we afford special opportunities to displaced persons to be resettled and receive support through communities. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. So prior to the Refugee Act of 1980, which is what established the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program that Lizzie talked about, we had resettlement happening in the United States for displaced persons through ad hoc programs. It was generally responded to context-specific displacement. So after World War II, we saw huge resettlement initiatives happening in the United States through special pathways that the president and U.S. government would set up. Notably, we saw, immediately after World War II, around 40,000 refugees being able to kind of have a plan for resettlement in the United States. All of these, though, were focused on context-specific, environmental-specific situations, and really pulled on charitable organizations to set up and welcome individuals. So it was truly a public-private partnership, but also there weren't the same resettlement agencies that we've seen emerge after 1980. So these were charitable organizations, but also groups located in local communities who had the resources to welcome and support. So our history in the United States with resettlement is a history of groups coming forward and supporting newcomers. With the establishment of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program in 1980, we saw the permanent establishment of what's known as refugee resettlement agencies. And these are organizations that are private organizations, nonprofits, that work with the government to implement the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and the resettlement kind of initiatives post arrival. We have seen through this program, as Lizzie mentioned, that community engagement has continued to be a huge component of that resettlement scheme. And so co-sponsorship programs have emerged immediately following the Refugee Act of 1980 and have continued to exist within our resettlement programs today. So a little bit has happened over the last couple of years, responding to Operation Allies Welcome, the ongoing kind of conflicts and displacements around the world that I just want to know, because I think there are two, and we can go to the next slide, two kind of broad areas of sponsorship. So sponsorship has been, different sponsorship pathways and opportunities have been made available both through the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State. These opportunities are different in their structures and who the intended beneficiaries are. And so I think it's important to note today, as we're talking about community engagement and the different forms that might take. So through the Department of Homeland Security, they've made opportunities for individuals to provide financial support to humanitarian parolees arriving through United for Ukraine and the processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. It's important to note that through this program, individuals are known as supporters, and they apply to sponsor someone on a temporary basis. And it's their responsibility to provide financial support to those beneficiaries as they relocate to the United States and for the duration of their stay in the United States. Although these programs do not require community sponsorship groups to engage, we at the Community Sponsorship Hub have a program that we've expanded to support groups who want to engage and support newcomers, and that's the Sponsor Circle program, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. Outside of the Department of Homeland Security's sponsorship programs, we have on the Department of State's sponsorship programs. Notably, we've talked a little bit about co-sponsorship, and I'm going to jump into that a little bit later. We're also going to talk about private and university sponsorship. But just to note, those programs that exist through the Department of State are known as community sponsorship programs, and these are distinct from fiscal sponsorship programs. So what is community sponsorship? Community sponsorship is an umbrella term which identifies the pairing of individuals or refugees or other forcibly displaced persons with groups of individuals who commit to providing clearly defined financial and or in-kind contributions and services to support their welcome and integration. Just to note here, community sponsorship is distinct from general volunteerism and fiscal sponsorship in a number of ways. First, it's taken on by a group rather than an individual. It pairs a group with an individual or family who has been forcibly displaced. It requires that financial commitment but it also requires clearly defined commitment to offer resettlement services that support welcome and integration. Rather than focusing on one activity or one area of resettlement, it provides a holistic kind of wraparound services. So rather than apartment setup or language acquisition, it really does have the sponsors engage, the community sponsors engage in a number of resettlement services to really provide wraparound support. So and these programs can last anywhere from 3 to 12 months or more. It depends on the type of program. So what are the strengths of community sponsorship? First, we know that it supports refugees and other forcibly displaced persons that are sponsored through these programs as they develop vital social capital in their new communities. We also know that it supports deepened integration, both for the newcomers, but also for the communities in which they are arriving to. We also know it expands resources available in local communities, and it brings communities together in both acts of service, but also together to identify the strengths and the challenges within their community for navigating services and other opportunities. And we know it fosters more welcoming attitudes towards refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, and other immigrant populations. So I want to take a step back because community sponsorship is a broad umbrella term, but we know there are different types of community sponsorship. And so on one side, we've talked a little bit about the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and reception and placement. And that is a program that's led on the resettlement agency side. So community groups can engage through community sponsorship through what we call co-sponsorship. And this is, like I said, something that's been around since 1980. Co-sponsorship programs are where the resettlement agency acts as the primary sponsor, and then a group of individuals are the partner with that resettlement agency and are known as the co-sponsors. On the other side, the other programs we're going to be talking about today are community-led community sponsorship programs. So these are programs where groups of individuals themselves take on the direct responsibility of welcoming refugees and other forcibly displaced populations as they arrive to the United States. So I'm going to quickly go over co-sponsorship and some of the requirements we see more generally for this. So co-sponsorship is available throughout the United States through local resettlement offices. So to be a co-sponsor, you partner with that resettlement agency, and then you provide a majority of those core reception and placement services for the duration of that sponsorship period. To become a co-sponsor, individuals go through some type of application and vetting process, which includes background checks, and they also fundraise and provide in-kind or financial support. And again, it's program specific, so each local resettlement office will have different requirements around this. They'll also go through training to prepare them for supporting newcomers. And then they will be monitored and overseen by the resettlement agencies to ensure that they have, the sponsorship journey is successful for them and the newcomers. And then they also commit to supporting newcomers for a set period of time. So we've seen, again, historically, co-sponsorship has existed in the United States. Through our initiatives at the Community Sponsorship Hub, we've really tried to expand and rapidly scale up and support programs and offering co-sponsorship programs through the last couple of years. So in 2019, there were around 47 organizations across the United States that had some type of community engagement or sponsorship program. And through some of the work that we've done and our national partners, we've been able to support up to 145 organizations get involved and had these opportunities for groups to directly support in their local communities. Okay, so more recently, we've talked about some of the community-led innovations. And so I want to dive into the first kind of contemporary program that we launched in October of 2021, which was the Sponsor Circle program. This program was launched to support Afghan entrance resettlement through Operation Allies Welcome. It was supported by a consortium of partners and led by the Community Sponsorship Hub. It was done through an MOU with the State Department, to ensure that we had additional pathways to support Afghans as they resettled. The Sponsor Circle program, since launching, has supported 6,000 has supported over 11,000 newcomers, and we've seen engagement from over 6,000 Americans. And I apologize, I think for some reason the map of the states isn't showing, but we've had applications and supported sponsor circles, as we call them, the community groups in 37 states. Now, the Sponsor Circle program allows groups of at least 5 individuals to go through a process in which they develop a welcome plan, we call it, and then they work with professionals through the consortium to support their planning for newcomers as they arrive, and then throughout the sponsorship period. There are a range of supports that we at the Community Sponsorship Hub and our consortium partners provide, which include credits for temporary housing and financial assistance in emergency situations. Now, the launch of the Sponsor Circle program is notable because, like I said, it was the first contemporary kind of response that was led by community groups in supporting resettlement. This is an initiative that was similar to private sponsorship, and it was an emergency pilot program that we've learned quite a lot from as we prepared for the launch of the Welcome Corps program. So the Sponsor Circle program did pave the way for the Welcome Corps program, which we refer to, or is more commonly referred to as private sponsorship in the United States. The Welcome Corps program is a new service opportunity for Americans who are inspired to welcome refugees seeking freedom and safety. Welcoming refugees through sponsorship, like I said, is not only a benefit to the refugees being welcomed, but it benefits all of our communities, and it does bring in groups to support one another through shared acts of service. Now, to note, the Welcome Corps program is a public-private partnership. It is led by, it is a program of the Department of State. Again, it's this community sponsorship program, and it's implemented by a consortium of organizations with expertise in refugee protection, resettlement, and welcome. That consortium is led by the Community Sponsorship Hub, but we have here some of our partners who play vital roles in that. Through the Welcome Corps program, private sponsor groups of at least 5 individuals commit to providing core resettlement services to refugees who they sponsor for a minimum of 90 days. They go through a Welcome Corps training and some other onboarding requirements, including background checks. They raise funds to support the resettlement effort. It's a minimum of $2,375 per refugee sponsored, and then they submit 30 and 90-day reports. Now, private sponsor groups are really key to the process here. They support newcomers in a host of ways. Some of these are you'll notice similar to the services that are provided through reception and placement, but also they provide those secondary adjacent services. So helping find childcare and helping navigate the local community. So I'm not going to go through kind of the responsibilities of sponsor groups. You can see some of them here. We also have available on the Welcome Corps website a checklist and a sponsorship journey guide, which you can look at to kind of better understand all the different activities that private sponsor groups commit to taking as they welcome refugees. They also work with the refugees post-arrival to identify their goals and plans and help them navigate resources available in their local community to achieve those. These private sponsor groups are supported and overseen by what we call private sponsor organizations. These organizations' primary role is to recruit private sponsor groups or take groups that may not have an affiliation with any of the private sponsor organizations and support them through their sponsorship journey. So what do? They provide pre-arrival application and preparation support, and then they provide post-arrival mentorship to all private sponsor groups. Outside of that, they solicit, receive, and review the 30 and 90-day reports. They might offer training and additional resources to support the private sponsor groups as they support newcomers. And then obviously the private sponsor organizations who are professionals with a background in resettlement, they intervene if there are issues of concern and will alert the Community Sponsorship Hub. And then they continue to receive communication throughout the process and are that kind of go between between the consortium partners and the private sponsor groups. Private sponsor organizations are overseen and supported by the Community Sponsorship Hub in collaboration with our consortium partners. So just going to quickly go through kind of how private sponsor groups can welcome through Welcome Corps. So there are two different ways a private sponsor group can be can welcome newcomers, refugees. One is through matching. This was launched in January of 2023, and it pairs Americans waiting to welcome refugee families with refugees abroad who they do not have any previous connection or tie to. Later this year, we'll be launching the identification portion of the program, and that's where private sponsor groups can name and identify a refugee abroad they'd like to sponsor. I'm going to quickly just go through some of the countries that we currently have private sponsor groups supporting refugees arriving through sub-Saharan Africa, and that is continuing to expand outside. But the first kind of set of newcomers coming in are arriving from countries in the sub-Saharan African area. So a couple of things about the matching process. The matching process really takes into account considerations around the capacity and resources available within the local community of the private sponsor group. It also takes into account key information about the refugee family and the local community. Refugees selected to be served through Welcome Corps are informed of the name of their sponsor group and information about the community resettlement before they travel. And then later, as I mentioned, this year will be it'll be available for private sponsor groups to identify an individual abroad that they would like to support, as Lizzie mentioned earlier as well. That refugee will then be referred to U.S. RAP program for consideration to be resettled in the United States. And again, Lizzie went through some of the considerations around that. I just want to quickly go over today. The Community Sponsorship Hub has received applications from PSGs to be matched with the refugees in around 25 states, which is we're very excited about the opportunities there. And finally, I think this notes really the aims of the Welcome Corps program. It's to equip and empower Americans to directly welcome refugee newcomers, and it's to enable organizations, colleges and universities, some of those that you represent on this call today, to support them in that work.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. That was really helpful. And I think we have heard so many amazing benefits of community sponsorship. And I think one that resonates with me is fostering more welcoming attitude, which is, I have actually in the chat today one person who have welcomed me and played an amazing sponsor role when I came as a refugee, Dr. Leslie Kaplan, who's now trying to work something in Jacksonville to work around the Welcome Corps on campus. Really amazed that she is with us today. So now actually we're gonna dig deeper on the Welcome Corps on campus with Beth. So my question is, can you share insight into the implementation and impact of the Welcome Corps on college and campuses, as well as discuss the opportunities and challenges faced in fostering a welcoming environment for refugees with the campus community?
Thanks, Basma, and thanks everyone for being here today. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout. So the Welcome Corps on campus was launched on July 6, 2023, under the broader umbrella of the Welcome Corps. Despite growing interest in the intersection between higher education and displacement, there hasn't been a structured and sustainable pathway for refugee students to access higher education in the U.S. With this program, universities and colleges can participate in Welcome Corps on campus, which is the U.S. government's private sponsorship program, is part of that under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, or U.S. RAP, that Lizzie was talking about earlier on this webinar. So this is a public-private partnership. It's a program of the Department of State, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, and funded by them. And it's implemented through a consortium of organizations with expertise in higher education and refugee resettlement. And you see those organizations listed here on this slide. On the next slide, we see that we are living in a time of historic displacement. There are over 108 million individuals displaced worldwide and over 35 million with refugee status. Those displaced have doubled over the last decade, and it has been the most that we've seen since World War II. The speed and volume of displacement is outpacing the availability of solutions for those displaced, such as return, resettlement, or local integration. Amidst this global displacement, one of the few durable solutions, resettlement, is only available to a sliver of refugees that are displaced, and those that are displaced. Less than 1% of the population are resettled annually worldwide. Access to opportunities for higher education are even more limited for refugees, and only 6% of refugees are able to access higher education worldwide, compared to over 40% of the general population. Some students overseas with refugee backgrounds are able to enroll in U.S. higher ed as international students, but the process for obtaining student visas and F1 visa is quite challenging, and it doesn't provide a permanent immigration pathway. So the Welcome Corps on Campus is an innovative program that provides new opportunities. This provides resettlement to the U.S. through a higher education pathway. Refugee students that arrive through the Welcome Corps on Campus are part of the broader RAP, U.S. RAP program, U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, and are arriving and are therefore provided a pathway to citizenship as part of this. As all refugees coming through U.S. RAP are. Academic and integration supports are provided through the campus and community members, and this supports refugees to integrate and have stronger integration and a warm welcome within the campus communities. And the program also provides supports to campuses and sponsors, providing opportunities to bring together campus communities and build their capacity to welcome refugee students through private sponsorship. On the next slide, we see that student identification is one of the key aspects of this program. Student identification is happening for the first cohort, which is expected to arrive fall of 2024. So for the 2024-25 academic year. For that first cohort, refugee students should be between the age of 18 and 24 years of age, single without dependents, so unmarried without children, have completed secondary schooling, and be proficient in spoken and written English. There is a selection process that is currently underway through WUSC, which is one of the consortium partners, and more information is available on this on the website, and we can provide some of those links during this presentation or afterwards as well. For the first year, refugee students will be identified of those that are living in Kenya. And at the same time, we'll also be identifying students for the fall 2025 campus or academic year. And those students for fall of 2025 will be based currently in Kenya or in Jordan. And over time, we are anticipating that this program will continue to grow and include other geographic areas of where refugees are currently located overseas. So while the student identification is happening, at the same time, the program is working with institutions to match students with colleges and universities based on the student's academic and overall fit. Final admission decisions do lie with the admissions office, and the program will be working with those institutions, with each institution to find strong matches. Students enrolled will be enrolled in associate or bachelor degree programs. So on the next slide, we see that private sponsor groups are a key component of this work. Private sponsor groups are groups of individuals within the campus community, adults, either American citizens or lawful permanent residents that are living within the community. And sorry, one second. That are living within the community and coming together to form private sponsor groups. So they work in close collaboration with the institution and institutional leadership. And as part of that preparation and application process, they are planning and demonstrating that they will provide core sponsorship services for a sponsorship period of 12 months. So the sponsorship period for Welcome Corps on campus is 12 months. Sponsor groups on campuses may sponsor more than one student within an academic year. And as sponsor groups are coming together, they should consist of a diverse set of campus stakeholders. So this may be faculty, staff, students, alumni, and those sponsor groups may include members from the broader community, but should include those that are directly connected with the campus. Another key aspect of this are the institutions, and they play a critical role in the successful implementation of this program. So the institutions support or drive much of this work. So they support or drive the establishment of that campus private sponsor group. They secure support for the program participation by engaging various offices and departments within the university or college. So the admissions office, advancement, etc. They provide financial support for that student. So for example, may identify and provide scholarship, tuition waivers, other grants or housing supports, etc. And they are also leading or supporting the PSG in fundraising efforts for the Welcome Corps on campus. The campus, the institution also commits to admitting one or more refugee students to the university to study. So core sponsor, so what you see here is the array of core sponsorship services that private sponsor groups and institutions are responsible for under the Welcome Corps on campus. This, and you can see here, this is an array of services, and these are to be carried out throughout that 12-month sponsorship period. And in some cases, maybe longer than that 12-month period, but that's the commitment that the sponsor group and institution makes to providing these core services. So the application process is focused on the private sponsor group. So the private sponsor group is the one submitting the actual application for sponsorship. Each group member needs to complete background checks, and a link to this is provided on the website and as part of that application. The group must complete required training. They complete a welcome plan. This is a detailed plan. Aubrey mentioned that in other forms of sponsorship, there's often a similar plan where they are detailing out how they will carry out those core sponsorship services. As part of the application process, each member commits to a code of conduct and commit to providing those core services. They also provide information, academic admission information, and the institution must provide a commitment letter. And there's a form for this that's available on the website that will also be included as part of that application. And then finally, the groups are raising funds to support in that sponsorship period. And we see here that this is a key aspect of this work. And so there's some strategies and tips that the program provides on how campuses or private sponsor groups may go about doing this, including tuition waivers, scholarship, leveraging in-state tuition, engaging with alumni and diaspora communities, as well as I wanted to note that students are arriving through the Welcome Corps on campus are eligible for federal financial student aid. So students would apply for that after arrival to the US, but that would be retroactively applied. So you may be wondering, what do I do now? How can I get started? So a key part of this is getting to know the campus, getting in touch with those key stakeholders within your campus, mapping out key resources, and starting to do that outreach and awareness building. This program is a group approach to sponsorship and is also intended to be a whole of campus approach. So really engaging the various aspects of the campus community to support in this process. Forming a private sponsor group is, of course, a key aspect of this, ensuring all of those application requirements are met. And then the application for private sponsor groups is open and available on the website. And so private sponsor groups can apply directly there. So thank you very much. I will hand it back to Basma.
Thank you so much, Beth. And I hope that you are learning today as much as I learned from the three amazing speakers. I think now we can really take 10 minutes to answer some questions that we have been receiving in the Q&A. Some of them you might be able to answer them directly in there, but I think one of the first question, Beth, which I know it's asked in the chat, but just to make sure, even though we answered it early about the naming or identification phase and when that will happen.
So that will happen later this year, and we will have more information about that. So I know this is of interest to a lot of people. So we are working closely with PRM to finalize that information and to have it available. So it will be later this year, and we, people can sign up for email updates and continue to watch the website where we will post information once that's available.
Thank you, Beth. And I want to answer Kristen Allen question about providing plans to support refugees who wish to form a private sponsorship group and might have some challenges and barriers to language access. Yes, for sure. We have on the website some languages already available, but also we will have through the private sponsorship organizations who are supporting the private sponsorship group really support with language needs, and we will make sure through our communication, including today's webinar, to have these webinars materials translated into the language requested. I want to actually thank Tarjim Lee, who we have the executive director with us today, for supporting with the translation, and also prose.com for supporting with the translations as well of the materials. Aubrey, is there a question you want to answer that you feel you are seeing it already?
Yeah, so I'll just say a couple of, I guess, questions I saw come out about private sponsor organizations. So unlike through reception and placement, there is not funding made available through the government for organizations, private sponsor organizations. We at the Community Sponsorship Hub realize that this is something financial kind of support is needed for private sponsor organizations. And so we are working with organizations who are approved to identify funding avenues and streams in the private sector outside of government funding, but currently at the current moment, there is not funding made available for private sponsor organizations by the U.S. government.
Thank you, Aubrey. And the second question is no, and I see the same question in the chat. We talked about when is the naming or identification phase began. What are the necessary steps a sponsor should start working on before that phase launch? Do people need to put application, or what kind of preparation that they need to do before?
Yeah, great question. So there are certain steps that groups can start to research or prepare. Again, more information, including eligibility criteria and any updates on the program more generally, will be forthcoming over the, we will be releasing more information over the next couple of months, if not sooner. So in the meantime, I would encourage people to explore the website. We do have the welcome plan that is available now that outlines how sponsor groups can research and prepare within their community and what type of information or what type of services they'll be providing, and can start to prepare that. There is also the sponsorship training. The general training will likely remain the same, although we may have some additional information or training available for naming, but people can start on that training currently. And I would say those are the two main steps that people can take to start preparing now.
Thank you so much, Beth. I think the other question is about private sponsorship organizations, if they are funded by the state, if what people could know more about private sponsorship organizations.
Yeah, so just to quickly say, I mean, I think here we continue to work with private partners to identify alternative funding streams. Another question I know there's in the chat around private sponsor organizations is if state refugee coordinators and state refugee health coordinators are made aware of the PSOs operating in that state. Absolutely. Each state, we will work with the state refugee coordinators and continue to be in communication with them. We are already, and will continue as new PSOs come online around the private sponsor organizations operating in that state. Also to note that each state will have a lead private sponsor organization who will be kind of the primary coordinator in those states between conversations with the other private sponsor groups and the state or state agencies and other stakeholders in the state. So we really do want to make sure it's coordinated, there's collaboration and communication always flowing in the states between the different stakeholders and the private sponsor organizations.
And this question could be already answered in the presentation, but maybe quickly by any of the speaker. So those individuals coming through the community sponsorship Welcome Corps program are selected by whom? Are they randomly chosen, or the sponsor can apply for a specific individual or family? Whoever want to answer.
Albert, do you want to take this, or I can take this?
So sorry, which question was it, Besma?
It's really who choose the refugee, who are, how we choose them. Are they randomly being picked by the sponsor?
Okay. Yeah, so I think there's a couple there. So we have through the current phase, the matching phase, private sponsor groups and refugees abroad that go through informed consent and opt into the program. Both take a kind of a survey or ask a questionnaire to identify their preferences and needs in resettlement, the refugees. On the other side, the private sponsor groups themselves identify the local resources available within their community to support refugees, their capacity to support, so how large of a case, a family size could they take on. This information is then put into a system where one of our consortium partners has developed a system to help match and kind of rank preferences. After that, kind of the information about possible matches are identified, and then another consortium partner goes through, who has a history in matching and placement, goes through and identifies out of those potential matches the best match to happen. That information is then passed along to, or the kind of broad details are passed along to the private sponsor organization or private sponsor group to assure the case, and then information is relayed to the refugees about that location, the private sponsor group. So that's through matching. As Lizzie mentioned, when we get to the identification phase, it'll be a bit different, but that's kind of so to ensure on the matching side, both we have good matches and pairings to support and make sure that the local resettlement community or the local community has the services needed for refugees, but also that the needs of the refugees and preferences are accounted for in that matching process.
Great. Any other question that the panelists want to answer before we wrap up? Because I know we are receiving many questions ongoing.
I'm happy to answer a few. Apologies, I think my video needs to be restarted by whoever is in charge of hosting on the webinar. I can't do it myself.
Definitely.
A few questions that we got. One was whether Welcome Corps is for people who are already within the United States borders. It is not. But people who are already within the United States or at the border can apply for asylum. Welcome Corps, because it is part of the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, is for refugees who are still abroad and are looking for a pathway to come to the United States. We also got a question about whether refugees are able to choose if they'd like to be resettled through the Welcome Corps. And the answer is yes. Resettlement Support Center staff of the Resettlement Support Center who are working with refugees to collect their information for the U.S. government after they've been referred to the program, work with refugees who are approved for resettlement to the United States to give them information about Welcome Corps and other resettlement options. So refugees are given information if they are approved for resettlement, and they can say, no, I would prefer not to be resettled through the Welcome Corps. I'd rather be resettled through a resettlement agency. So they are given that voice in the process. I think we got a question about whether there was any Latin American country.
And Beth, I think, Lizzie, you can, I think, open your camera now.
Oh, perfect. Let's see. There we go. So a question about whether there's any Latin American country. Right now, the matching phase of the program that Aubrey mentioned has been open to countries in sub-Saharan East Africa, but we expect that matching will be opening more broadly to other parts of the world in the future. And once phase 2 launches, there will be some additional eligibility criteria, but the intention with phase 2 is for that to be pretty global so that people from regions all over the world are eligible for sponsorship if they meet the other requirements. And then there was one question about how long for a case to arrive after it's been identified. So once a case has been referred to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program through Welcome Corps, it's been identified by a private sponsor, the case will go through the full U.S. security screening, vetting, processing, medical exams, etc. That any other refugee coming through refugee resettlement to the United States goes through. That process does take some time. I don't know what the exact average is right now. I think we often say it takes around 2 years. I know the U.S. government is working to make sure its processes are as efficient as possible, and we hope that timeline gets shorter so that people can come faster. But there is a delay between when someone is named or identified for phase 2 of the program and when they arrive. If someone is being matched, they do arrive more quickly because they're already well into that processing that takes so much time overseas.
I think there are a couple of other questions around one question was around welcoming and kind of the private sponsor group size versus the newcomer size. So again, in the matching phase, in all phases, we take into account the capacity of the sponsor group, their welcome plan, the local resources available to them, and that kind of helps us identify the number of individuals that they could welcome in a case site. So we ask questions, but also we're reviewing that match to make sure that we feel comfortable that the private sponsor group and the local community has the resources needed to support that family, that case size.
Well, thank you so much. This is the first community conversation for many to come. I want to make sure that we have time to recap and close, but definitely collectively, these presentation really scored the community sponsorship evolution, community engagement, and the expansion actually into higher education. The common thread throughout is the united efforts that strives for really holistic refugee integration, welcoming, embracing diversity and opportunity across the United States. I want to thank our amazing speakers. We really want to extend our sincere gratitude for the speakers, Elizabeth, Beth, and Aubrey, for their expertise, dedication, and insightful presentation today. I want to thank our attendees. We also want to express our appreciation to all of the people who registered, who attended, for joining us in this journey as we are really understanding and engaging in sponsorship and community sponsorship and Welcome Corps. We want you to stay connected as we really conclude this webinar. We encourage you to stay connected with us and explore the possibility that Welcome Corps program offers. Let's continue to work together to create more welcoming and supportive environment. And I want to make sure to see you next month with a new community conversation, and hopefully we will answer more of your question. Thank you so much and have a great day.